Yes, sir. Our next work session, U.S. Congressional Update, Congressman Robert J. Wittman.
Sir, welcome. So good to see you again, Congressman. Thanks for being here. And before you even start, I just want to thank you for your service in the U.S. Congress and for being here with us today. We greatly appreciate your presence, sir.
Well, thank you. Chairman Holland, thank you. It's a real honor to be here before the board. Supervisor Carroll, Supervisor Schneider, Supervisor Miller, Supervisor Engel, County Administrator Casey, County Attorney Minks. It is truly an honor to be here. It brings back a lot of great memories. You know, I spent a number of years on the Board of Supervisors and several years in the same position that you were in. My wife used to tell me during that time, she said, if you go with me to the grocery store, we have to leave an hour early. Because she knows how that connection is. And I can tell that you all are incredibly connected with the community. And thank you for the opportunity to come here and report to you on some things that I think are of significance to you and your constituents here in Chesterfield County. Let's begin with the United States Post Office. We know that our Central Virginia region has been very adversely affected by problems in operations at the Richmond Processing and Distribution Center, better known as the Sanston Center. It goes back to the beginning of last year. We actually began the process to communicate with Postmaster LaJoy about the problems there in Sanston, beginning back in July with a letter to him asking him to address those issues with us. We got somewhat of a distant response. We followed up again with some communications in September saying that we wanted some more definition there, that we thought that there ought to be an internal investigation, that their Inspector General ought to look closely at what was happening there. We finally, at that point, requested a visit. They said, no, you can't go there and visit. And we're like, well, why not? And then subsequently in December, we had a meeting with officials from the Postal Service. And again, we asked for a visit, and they said no. We got our colleagues from the rest of the Virginia delegation to write a letter to Postmaster LaJoy in January, again demanding a visit. Again, they said no. And finally, we got to visit in March. And the reasons that we were given as well, you know, we have all this holiday mail that comes in, all these other things. And I said, listen, we want to see the operation with its problems and everything. We don't want a dog and pony show. We want to come in and see actually what's happening. We finally got there in March. At just about 2 weeks later, the Inspector General's report from the Post Office came out, a very, very critical report of what happened there. In fact, unfortunately, the Sanston Center was ranked as one of the bottom 10 facilities in the entire United States. Folks, I'm telling you, it takes some work to get that ranking. But exactly. And the IG had 10 recommendations, but the bottom line is this, is that they had systemic problems there for a significant period of time. They had problem with employee turnover. They had problems with management going in and out. And then on top of that, they took new technology and brought it in across the whole operation. So, you know, if you're going to bring new technology in, maybe you ought to test it in some area first to figure out if it works, and then you can gradually expand it. Well, they didn't do that. And they did it on top of having personnel problems and management problems. So that exacerbated it. And that's brought us to the point where we still are today. Listen, there's still issues there. They gave us numbers on the number of first-class pieces delivered on time, very different than the Inspector General's numbers. And the Inspector General had 10 recommendations. And the facility has to agree to all of those 10 recommendations. And one of the things we spoke to them about there was that we were adamant that the Postal Service needed to have, with members of Congress, town halls. We wanted them to go out and talk to their customers, talk to our constituents about what was happening. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And we said, well, yes, you are, because we're going to plan these things and we're going to invite you, and you know, you're going to need to be there. And they finally capitulated a little bit. But of the 10 recommendations from the Inspector General, one of them was for the Postal Service in Richmond to have these town halls. And they're supposed to agree to all 10 recommendations. Guess what recommendation they still haven't agreed to? Having the public meetings. Now, if you're in business, don't you want to talk to your customers? It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, you know, even if you've had problems, why not be transparent with them and say, hey, listen, we got problems. We're on the way to fix them. You know, face them. It only gets worse if you don't. So we are still underway to push the Postal Service. There is still a big difference between the IG's number of about 75% of first-class letters being delivered on time and their number of 95%. You know, there's a 20% differential there. We think that they need to address that. We are going to go back and visit again. We're going to continue to hold their feet to the fire because they are not where they need to be. Now, it is better, but it's not where it needs to be. In fact, ironically, we were in our office the other day and we got word that there was a truck fire on Interstate 64. And I said, well, I wonder what's going on there. And it was a Postal Service truck that was full of mail. It burned to the ground. So now they're going to have to explain what happened to all those letters and those packages, and on top of the ones that aren't showing up. And remember, these were things like people's pharmaceuticals, people's checks. I mean, all kinds of lab tests didn't show up. It's incredible. I mean, these things are, it's something if you get a piece of bulk mail and it doesn't come to you. In fact, some people would prefer that it probably didn't get there. But when it's a lab test that needs to get somewhere, this can be a matter of life and death, and especially for somebody on fixed income. If you don't get your check, that is a matter of life and death. So we're going to continue to push the issue there with the post office. Some of the other issues that we are working on, big thing with your economic development is workforce. The big thing we hear from folks across the spectrum is, what are you doing for workforce? I have a bill in called the effort to preserve or to create the future workforce. And what it does is it allows parents to use their 529 savings account for education in addition to 2- and 4-year degree programs, because right now you're limited in using your 529 savings account, which is your tax-free savings account. You can only use it for 2- and 4-year degrees. 60% of the jobs in the future aren't going to require a 2- or 4-year degree. And parents, when you start saving, your children are in 5th or 6th grade, you don't know what they're going to do, really, and they don't know what they're going to do. So to have it limited and then say, wow, if my child decides not to go to college, I'm going to have to pay taxes on those dollars, just doesn't make sense. So I have 130 co-sponsors for the bill, about 750 organizations across the country that are in favor of this very, very bipartisan bill to make sure that those savings accounts can be used for any post-secondary education. That's going to be the key. So as Chesterfield County Schools, as your students come out, they're going to have all kinds of choices. And we're doing the same thing with Pell Grants. The largest source of federal funding for education is to make sure Pell Grants can be used the same way, working with Bobby Scott, who's on the Education and Workforce Committee, to make sure that the opportunities to use resources are going to be opened up in all areas, because we're going to need those workers. Today, folks that like to work with their hands, that are experiential learners, we need them, and we want to make sure we're getting folks to the place where they learn the best. And our school systems are kind of coming around to that, that career pathways to make sure that we get students to where they need to be. We want to make sure the resources match that. Another thing that we're doing too, I have a bill in called the 21st Century Atomic Energy Act, and this focuses on making sure that we have nuclear energy as part of the future of our energy generation in this nation. The good news is some critical things are happening right here in the state of Virginia. We have an effort called Project Pele. It's the first effort in over 40 years to build a small-scale reactor that can be used to generate power in the civilian sector. It uses low-level nuclear materials which are not weaponizable. You can't take this and steal it and turn it into something. You'd have to go through literally months and months and months to turn it into anything. Believe it or not, that work's being done right here in Virginia at a place called BWXT that builds all the reactors for our aircraft carriers and our nuclear submarines. So we know how to do this. We can do it safely. This project will start out putting these facilities at military facilities. These reactors will start out as 1 megawatt, but they're expandable, so they can be gauged to larger applications. I spoke with Bob Blue at Dominion. They have 2 of these small modular reactors in their future plans. The governor, too, has an effort forward to make sure that we're using nuclear energy as part of that. If you are going to have renewables in part of your portfolio, you have to have these peaker plants. You have to have nuclear, I believe, and natural gas to provide energy when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. If you look at the carbon footprint, the lowest carbon footprint of any high-density energy source is nuclear energy. And listen, we're going to lead the way right here in Virginia. So we're about 14 months away from this reactor actually going into operation. Pretty incredible in what they're doing with the engineering in that. So good things moving forward there. Another thing, too, is we've been very involved with Secretary Buttigieg in your Poet Extension project to make sure that we look at all opportunities for federal funding, especially the what's called the RAISE effort there and where those dollars are available. We continue to advocate for your efforts there because we do know that that phase is going to take some federal dollars in order to make that happen. We want to make sure we're getting way out in front of that because you know how this process happens. It's kind of getting in line. So we want to make sure we get in line so as this project matures and is planned and gets to that point that you're all at the right place. So hopefully all the different sources of money come together at the same time. To me, that's absolutely critically important. So we're making sure that we're working within those realms also. And just overall, finally an appropriations bill got passed after 5.5 months. Listen, I wish we would just watch Chesterfield County and said, let's run the federal government like Chesterfield does. Budget on time. Yeah, exactly. Budget on time. On station as far as getting money to in balance. Exactly. Yes. So what a great lesson that's exactly. Well, and all those things I think are critically important to learn. 5.5 months. And here's the problem: when you do these continuing resolutions, they waste money. Because what you do is you mark time. You don't get to do things. You don't get to stop projects that you don't want to fund anymore. You got to keep funding them, and you don't get to start new things that you want to make better use of money. It just doesn't make sense. So, anyway, I have continued to push the leadership. I think 3 things need to happen that would change the whole scenario. First of all, is under the code we're required to get a budget done by April 15th. It hadn't happened in 18 years. I think if we don't get a budget done on time, members of Congress shouldn't get a paycheck. Have a bill called no budget, no pay. Pretty simple. Pay for performance. Get your job done, you get a paycheck. If not, we can't take your pay away, but we can certainly hold it in abeyance. Second of all is we have this crazy tradition of August recess. We go home for 4 weeks in August, 1 week in September. You have 2 legislating weeks left to get all these appropriations bills done. You know it's not going to happen, so then you end up with another continuing resolution and another one and another one. So my bill's pretty simple. It's the Stay on Schedule Act. You get all 12 appropriations bills, guess what? Done. You get to go home. If not, you're going to stay in Washington until things get done. If you want to see some motivation, keep these members in Washington during an election year. Things will happen. The last 2 is called Inaction Has Consequences. It's crazy. So if you have a shutdown, the workforce is divided into essential and non-essential. Now, Chesterfield County doesn't have any non-essential employees. But you have essential and non-essential, and then you don't pay them. So you tell them, go to work, essential employees go to work, and we're not going to pay you. And then eventually when they come back, you do pay them, and then you have this, unfortunately, tension between the folks that went to work, didn't get paid, and those that didn't get to work, and everybody still gets paid. But guess who gets paid while government's shut down? Members of Congress. It's insane. So my bill pretty much says we're going to keep the federal workforce going to work, we're going to continue to pay them, and we are not going to pay members of Congress. I've been through 4 shutdowns. Whenever there's a shutdown, I take the pay that I get, set it aside, and I donate it. So I've given it to food banks and to veteran service organizations. I don't think it's right for a single member of Congress to take pay for not getting the job done. So anyway, so I think those are some things where you can actually hold members of Congress accountable to be able to do the things that are necessary. Last thing, too, is the Richmond Metro Zoo. As you know, they do a wonderful job in the cheetah program there. And they have been under the CITES, which is a law that regulates how you can export endangered and threatened species. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said, no, we're not going to give you the permit to export to South Africa. And we said, why? They've been doing it well. They've shown genetic diversity there. They're doing all the things that they're supposed to do, and yet they haven't been allowed to do this. So I had a one-on-one meeting with Martha Williams, who's the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to encourage her to sit down and talk to the folks at the Richmond Metro Zoo so they understand what they do, why they do it. Because I think some of the reasons that they gave for denying this are not a correct assumption about what's happening there, and they haven't given the full consideration of what's going on. So that meeting will happen, so hopefully we can open up the roadblocks so the Richmond Metro Zoo can actually get back to exporting these cheetahs. They have the most expansive cheetah breeding program on the face of the earth. And when you have cheetahs in certain areas of Africa that are endangered, it's astounding to me why you wouldn't want to take advantage of an organization that wants to do it on their own, and they're raising dollars to do that on their own. So good for Chesterfield County, good for the cheetah population. I would argue good for South Africa too. So those are some of the things we're working on that have local nexus here, and we're focused on getting things done, Mr. Chairman. So if there are any questions, glad to take them. Anything else you want us to be working on, I'm standing by, ready, willing, and able to do that.
Thank you, Supervisors. Any comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Miller.
It's good to see you, Congressman Wittman. Thank you for being here today.
Mark, thank you. Let me, before you jump in, let me give you an update. We have had recent conversations with postal officials about the formal addressing of North Chesterfield being Bonaire. So we're all on top of that. We're having some conversations about how they can do that administratively. There's always a bureaucratic stepwise that you have to go to. We think it's pretty easy for them to do that, especially since the county already recognizes it. It's already recognized geographically. It's not like you're changing anything. To me, it's a pretty simple process. So we are continuing to push. The initial reaction was, well, we can't do that. And so no. You can do that. You may not want to do that, but you can do that. So let's find a way to make that happen. So I'm sorry,
Thank
but I was part of the update.
Well,
So
that's
anyway.
question number one. Let me check that off.
Okay.
It's interesting in that, was having a conversation this morning with Delegate Cherry and with Dr. Casey, because, he's having kind of similar issues with Colonial Heights. And, where do you live and taxes and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
The whole North Chesterfield, South Chesterfield, I was talking with Mr. Engel earlier today. North Chesterfield goes all the way down to Route 10, right?
Yeah.
Route 1.
Wow.
So it's really hard as far as the geographical issues with it. I think it needs to be revisited.
Yeah.
Specifically with Bonaire. Bonaire, the folks there, as you know, and you represent them also, it means a lot to them, and just culturally, all the rest. So it's a very special place architecturally and all the rest. So, you weren't here, or maybe you heard my comments with regard to Commissioner Petrosky in that even getting an electric sign there, there's an energy there, there is a nuance there that the people want to protect.
Yes.
So it kind of falls on that. And what I want to talk about a little bit is about the local level when it comes to the Postal Service, since you brought it up.
Yes.
In that, I was having a conversation with Dr. Casey, I would say almost a year ago. I said, there's something weird going on because I have this constituent who sent his bill in late to Chesterfield. And he said, I absolutely know that I sent it. And I kind of got this feeling, well, he's not trying to kind of get away with something, and he went through step by step by step. And Dr. Casey was like, well, here's the situation. I said, this feels different.
Yes.
It really feels
Yes.
different. And so we get it almost immediately, especially when they're being they're going to be penalized, and they're going to, because they got the bill in late. It was but it wasn't my fault.
Yes.
And it really wasn't. And so I'm so glad that you're working with this. And I would make an argument that, in some businesses, you're going to go out of business if you don't do that. The Postal Service is not going to go out of business, and they're not an elected official. If we don't meet with our constituents, then we could be potentially out of a job, right?
Exactly.
But Postmaster LaJoy is not worried about that. He's not worried about losing his job, or if he isn't, then something's weird. I can't figure out, I can't put my finger on it, like how it works constitutionally, and maybe you can kind of shed some light on that. Why isn't he being relieved of his duties?
Sure.
And I would ask the question also, well, who was the one who originally appointed him, and how does that, maybe there's something there that we need to consider.
Well, remember, years ago there was a disconnection purposely from Congress to the post office. So it's a semi-private organization. So the postmaster is appointed by the Postal Commission. Now, we still have an oversight role, but we don't have any direct appointment there, neither does the executive branch. So they made it kind of a semi-autonomous organization. So he answers to the folks that are on that board there, and he serves at their pleasure. I think the other compelling thing, Supervisor Miller, is that it's not just Postmaster LaJoy, but it's the leadership that actually is at the levels there that make things happen in Sandston. And what I saw there was a complete of not only failure of leadership, but a failure to acknowledge the problems that they had. a failure to acknowledge that they couldn't keep people there, a failure to acknowledge that their management was going out the door. And then, in spite of that, there was no communication up the chain of command before they made this massive decision that they were going to put in place new technology, one of the first places across the United States in a facility that had these deep inherent problems, and that exacerbated it. That's when literally everything turned upside down. And they didn't even try to do it in a thoughtful way. They didn't even say, well, let's try a little bit of this to figure out if it works. They just boom, the whole thing. And then they had to go back to some manual processes because the machines just weren't working. And in addition to that, they had such turnover, the people that needed to have the experience on how to operate the machines weren't there. So it was just a nightmare in how things went about.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and
Sure.
I mean, I appreciate your efforts with
Thank
regard
you.
to that. As far as workforce development,
Yes.
I work for a community college.
Yes.
These are students that are showing up at all ages, and they want to shift what they're doing, and I just want to keep in the front of your mind how important the community colleges are in
Yes.
Virginia. This is what we do every day, and those individuals are ones in which, four-year college isn't necessarily a good match.
Right.
But being able to go into and get a career and be able to get a better paying job is so important.
Yeah.
Everything from welding to technology and everything in between. So I just want to keep that in the forefront of your
Yeah.
mind, how important it is. And then finally, I heard Secretary Buttigieg this morning talking about the high-speed rail that's going in with Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And I recognize, no doubt about it, with the traffic issues that are happening there, and at the same time, how important it is for that high-speed rail to be up and down the East Coast. I will just be absolutely candid with you
Sure.
with regard to Amtrak. We have taken the train from here to Florida multiple times as a family. I won't do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, just to be honest with you,
Yes.
I think that everything from not just the speed, that's a whole other issue, but just even simple as the cleanliness of the trains. I would not advocate for that. I'd prefer to fly, or I'll just drive.
Yeah.
And putting four
Yes.
adults in a car for 2 days to
Yes.
Florida, if I'm willing to do that, then it kind of gives you the level of how much I don't want to work with Amtrak any longer.
Yeah, and Amtrak has a whole variety of different issues, and we could spend all the rest of the day going through those. But I agree, and we need to look at corridor transportation, especially as it relates to using rail. And if nothing else, the place where things are starting to improve with rail is actually rail that would replace trucks on the road. So cargo rail, those can have a big impact, especially on the major thoroughfares there. So the more that tractor trailer traffic we can get off the road and put on rails, the better off we are. And the good thing is, in Virginia, as well as the FRA, the Federal Rail Administration, has put a significant amount of dollars into improving the main segment through Virginia, but more importantly is the spurs that come off that go to these distribution centers. So that's a great way to be able to transact commerce. Another thing, too, to update you all on, we met with the governor and others at the Port of Virginia, because as you can imagine, Port of Virginia and the Port of Savannah are seeing significant increases in traffic. In fact, we're seeing about 500 additional tractor trailers a day that are Maryland truck drivers that have to come out of Virginia. So far, everything is going well. We're trying to make sure we're coordinating so as those trucks leave, they don't all leave at the same time. We want to try to phase the trucks that are coming in so that you don't have backups on your major thoroughfares, because it's nothing but trucks going. So far, things have been well. They've sat down with the Maryland truck drivers to try to coordinate this. And Virginia's actually done a really good job in absorbing this. We have the capacity at the port, and we also have rail there. We can double stack containers on rail, so we've increased the rail capacity. So I think between those, we've done a pretty good job in absorbing this. So.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Other supervisors, any other comments or questions? Yes, Supervisor Carroll.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank you for coming out to the zoo
Yes,
to witness
thank you.
their cheetah program. I
Yes.
think it's, as you said, it's the most successful cheetah breeding program in the world.
Yes.
And the fact that they were able to trace the cheetahs in Africa down to only 3 cheetahs through DNA testing. They absolutely need to have the diversity in genes in order
Yes.
for the herd down there. So I appreciate your help on that. I look forward to getting it resolved. I know Mr. Andler would be greatly appreciated because, again, they're doing it better than anybody else.
They are, and I think there's a way forward. It's just a matter of getting all the parties involved to listen objectively. So,
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Supervisors? Any other supervisors?
Anybody else?
But first of all, I just want to thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your efforts, your recommendations. Wholeheartedly agree with them on the budget, April 15th, August recess. I completely agree with you, certainly,
Yes, sir.
and your efforts with the Postal Service. You know, my philosophy is that the president should be able to just fire the entire board of the Postal Service and just bring in a new group and regroup.
Yeah.
But anyway, I see that's quite difficult. But anyway, I applaud and especially your efforts on the 529 plan. I deal with a lot of families, it's a CPA and taxes as well, and they are funding those plans now for their children. And so that flexibility is so critical as we think about education and the cost thereof. So I applaud that effort. Thank you so very much for all you do and the difference you're making for us here in Virginia and nationally, that is.
Thank you.
Congressman, thank you for being here.
Well, thank
for
you.
your service,
It's
sir.
an honor to be here, an honor to be in some leadership positions there in Washington, especially on this new select committee on China. It'll just just astound you. I'm going to give you one statistic before I leave
Yes,
that
sir.
really is astounding. I know you all deal with it here in the community concerning fentanyl.
Okay.
And we had a hearing the other day with the former director of DEA, the former attorney general, the former director of the National Substance Abuse Center. And here's the astounding part is that every single ounce of fentanyl precursors, those are the base chemicals that make fentanyl, and fentanyl derivatives, comes from China. And it either comes through our southern border or, believe it or not, you can go today. There are 15 different websites where you can go online today and you can buy fentanyl online, and they say they're 100% guaranteed to pass customs. And then we have another frightening element of carfentanil, which is 10,000 times more potent than fentanyl, being manufactured in China. Think about this. The PRC, the People's Republic of China, is providing tax incentives and grants to these companies to produce that poison. They're importing in the United States. Last year we had 112,000 deaths from fentanyl poisoning, 112,000. There are 58,000 people that died in the Vietnam conflict. That's twice the casualties in the Vietnam War in 1 year. And here's the astounding statistic. When we have conversations about China has to stop this, China can stop it. And here's the statistic that tells you they can. Do you know how many deaths there were last year in China from fentanyl? Zero. Zero.
Okay.
If you were trying to go after a country to harm them,
Yes.
this is a direct assault on the American people.
Yes.
If you were to go after a country, what would you do? You would import as much poison as you could, especially a poison that's addictive, and then create these stresses. I know Sheriff Leonard here does an incredible job in trying to get folks, out of that addiction cycle, but it is incredible. So, we have to do more. There's policies we need to put in place in Congress to be able to stop this.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Supervisor Snyder.
This is similar to the vapes that kids are using
Yeah.
from China that they don't sell to their own citizens, but they export them to our country. So
Listen, great point. I have a bill in with Raja Krishnamurthy, who serves with me on the China Commission, to do the same thing, to ban the vapes that are coming in from out of the country, because we have no idea what's in them. And you can go through all kinds of different substances that are there, much of it unregulated. And remember, when they do these things synthetically, like the new carfentanil synthetic, the chemistry gets ahead of the law, because the law is very specific about the chemistry, and they make one little minor change where it doesn't fall under the law. And Supervisor Carroll, being in law enforcement for years, you make one little tiny change, and all of a sudden, guess what? The law doesn't cover it anymore. And that's how they're getting around it. So, Supervisor Schneider, I appreciate that. You're exactly right. It's not just fentanyl, but it's vapes and other compounds that are just harmful to our citizens.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Ingram.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I wasn't
comment.
going to
Yeah,
jump
one last
in because
comment.
everybody did such a good job.
Yeah.
I just, after listening to everything, I did want to comment and say thank you for actually knowing what's going on in Chesterfield. Your being here today has shown us that you are paying attention to Chesterfield. And people in Washington don't always pay attention to what's going on back home. So thank you for understanding what's going on here.
Well, Supervisor Engel, I appreciate that. I have a particular fondness for local boards of supervisors, having been there for a number of years, in fact, having spent 20 years in local government. This is where the rubber hits the road. The work that you all do, listen, as much noise and attention as Washington gets, if you want to know what on a daily basis makes a difference in people's lives, it's what you all do in this room. And it makes a much more immediate impact. When something happens in Washington, a lot of times it takes months and months and months for that to actually come to fruition. What you all do today will have an effect this afternoon. So,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all so much.
I want to mention
Thank
Natalie,
you.
our
Thank you.
liaison. I want to mention Natalie, who works so closely with your office and
Yes,
other offices,
yeah.
does a great job for Chesterfield. And again, toward Chesterfield excellence. Very good. Let's give my hand. Thank you. Thank you, sir. All the best.
Thank you.
And let us know if we can help you.
We'll do.
Okay.
Call me anytime.
Okay, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.